Hasn't happened in at least 50 years. The State House of Representatives failing to pass a budget. So the process now moves to the State Senate, where they have a lot more leeway to craft their own proposal. The reason the budget did not pass, according to House Speaker Sean Jasper, 32 hardline conservative legislators that recently formed the New Hampshire Freedom Caucus, which now looks very much like a force to be reckoned with in Concord. Joining us today, two of its leaders, State Representative J.R. Hole of Dunbarton and State Representative Keith Ammon of New Boston. Gentlemen, thanks for being with us this morning. So this has all happened so quickly. Is it safe to say that the catalyst for this was really the Freedom Caucus fighting the AHCA in Washington that sort of triggered the formation of the Freedom Caucus here in Concord?
Absolutely, yes. What we saw in D.C. was a small group of conservatives, right, within the Republican Party, who then went ahead and said they promised a repeal of Obamacare, not just trimming around the edges, and they didn't want to stand for Obamacare 2.0, per se.
Representative Ammon, on Twitter, you basically called your shot a couple of weeks ago, saying that this budget is going to have the same kind of problems with fiscal conservatives that the AHCA had with congressmen in the Freedom Caucus in Washington. Was the goal here essentially budget failure all along? Was that the victory that was in reach?
No, the goal was never budget failure. That is pure obstructionism. The goal was to begin the conversation 2 weeks ago, so that we could, find a place where we can find common agreement within the party. And you referenced Family Feud. To me, Family Feud is a delightful show where everyone is happy at the end. So it's not.
Which is not this case.
No, well, this is a disagreement on how to get forward. But in the end, we're still all Republicans.
Right. I think the goal for all of us, right, is to move forward. Some of us found the 10.5% increase that was proposed by House Finance in terms of growth of state spending, the money that comes out of the pocketbooks of the taxpayers, was too much.
And you guys wanted to peg state spending to the rate of inflation, which
right.
would be a significant cut in this budget that was proposed.
Well, I want to be careful that we not use Washington speak, right? Changes to reductions in, right? It was an increase in spending. We said 3% increase in spending was a good number. The House Finance came up with 10.5%. There was no cuts per se. There was no departments actually being cut. We were just trying to reduce the rate of growth.
And so, in reality, no one in Concord is talking about reducing the budget. We're disagreeing about how much to increase it.
How much it should grow, essentially. Now, the Speaker had some harsh words for the Freedom Caucus on Thursday, calling you, quote, disconnected from your constituents and disconnected from the facts. Let's take a listen to some of what he had to say about what he sees as the differences between mainstream Republicans and Liberty Republicans.
They believe that the people of the state do not want government. They do not want us to be doing the things that we do now. I think that clearly the history of what happened to us in 2012 and subsequent elections and what goes on the local election shows the people of the state are conservative, but they care about their fellow citizen. They don't just care about numbers. They don't care about arbitrary things. They want to make sure that the people of this state who are less fortunate than they are get the services that they need. They care about a quality education for their children and other people's children. People want to do well by each other, and certainly a large faction of this group only focuses on the fact that government really should be much smaller than it is, regardless of the consequences that has on their fellow man.
Representative Ammon, he's essentially saying you guys don't care about your fellow man.
And I hear that statement. First, I'd like to address the point that we're disconnected from our constituents. For Speaker Jasper to insert himself in our relationship with our constituents and say that he's the grand arbiter of that relationship, I take offense to that personally. Seriously. And also, he makes a point that we don't care about our fellow man. Using taxpayer money to solve problems isn't the only way to do things. That government isn't the solution for everything. And what we're trying to point out is limited governments, keeping government in its proper role makes more prosperous and better society for everyone. And that's the point of having an accountable transparent and government that serves the needs but isn't bloated.
Your reaction, Representative Hall?
Two things. There was a comment made about us not being conservatives, and I think if you look and do a roll call vote analysis between the 66 that opposed HB1 and those members who were here last term that opposed, let's say, expanded Medicaid, which was a significant growth in the size of government to the tune of $500 million, you'll find there's a significant overlap. It's one thing to say that I'm a conservative. It's another when we start talking about big programs, okay, the dairy bailout bill from a couple of weeks ago, expanded Medicaid from last year, right? Just throwing money at causes isn't the solution. To Representative Ammon's point, okay, there's other means to do this. Charity, right, where we personally get involved in the lives of others. We give money out of our own pockets, okay? That's not us compelling our neighbors to give to a cause through the means of government, but we do this, okay, because we're interested. We get out our own checkbooks and write checks to various nonprofits because we care about people. And that's an important distinction between the two, right? Using government to compel someone to give money versus just donating.
It's hard to see how charity could fill the gap of what HHS does, though. That's a behemoth in comparison.
Absolutely. So there is a role for government, okay, and we're not saying there's no role. What we're saying is we should make sure that we don't grow government so fast that the citizens on fixed income can't afford government anymore. We're seeing cases where people are losing their homes. Okay, there was a case in Londonderry just this past week that somebody's house went up for auction, and that's really sad when they can't stay in their home and they're in their 80s.
I'm hearing some members of the Freedom Caucus, there's back channel chatter here about vacating the chair, essentially overthrowing the speaker. Does he deserve to lose his job as the speaker over this, in your opinion?
I'll leave that up for the caucus and the full body. But when you consider that the budget wasn't acceptable to the party, the first time since 1969, I think that needs to be taken into consideration.
I think the answer here is the speaker pulled me aside out of the budget briefing on Monday and said, you have 50 to 60 votes to stop the budget. Okay, yes, we were there. I had counted 40 at that point, but clearly we were above the 50 to 60, I mean, we were 66 on HB1. So I think the point was, at that point, we should have started to have the conversation and not let the train run off the tracks. And I was willing and have always made myself available to the speaker to have these conversations, to talk to him and be available to help. We offered a huge set of amendments, right, as I pointed to you walking into the studio.
200 pages worth. 200
pages worth of amendments in the last 24 hours, right, prior to what happened on Thursday. We were working our best to try and come to the middle ground. What we felt was 10.5% was just an unacceptable amount in terms of growth of government.
But do you feel that he should not be the speaker anymore? Would you support a different speaker?
I would support a speaker who is willing to start to mend the fractured portions of the caucus. I don't know that overthrowing the current one is the best process forward, okay? I think there are other people who maybe should be empowered to be the negotiators going forward, because clearly there's some strong personalities that are now driving decisions as opposed to sitting at the table as adults and actually working this out. I think closing our House meeting yesterday 30 minutes into it, okay, after people drove hours to be there and we spent tens of thousands of dollars in mileage, was just an unacceptable solution.
What's the long-term goal here, though? Essentially, it's hard to see how you guys have enough votes to get to 3%. So there has to be some compromise. And essentially, to this point, you've essentially drawn that line in the sand and said no means no. Is there, I mean, a point where you kind of step down from the obstructionism and accept a budget that doesn't quite do what you want it to do?
So you mentioned that we were leaders of the group. There are no leaders in this group. These are a group of
like-minded individuals,
like-minded, sincere individuals, and independent thinkers. So it's not, you can't negotiate with a leader and say, and that leader is going to. We need the consensus within the group so that the votes are there.
You heard in the news, right, where Jasper's talking about 32 people opposing House Bill 2, right? And we were caught off guard when he brought that up instead of taking off the table HB1. So that was a little bit of a strange move. I got up to table it for a minute so we could finish discussions on House Bill 1. At the end of the day, even 32 is an important enough number when it comes to passing this budget at the end of the year. And I think it behooves those who are empowered in leadership, who have the positions to be able to, of authority within the caucus, to meet with all the different people. And that's part of the bridge building. And if you blow up the bridge early on, which is some of what happened, it takes a lot of work to build that back. And I'm trying to personally limit the negative comments because that doesn't help, right? We've got to get the personalities out.
I do want to get to one more thing here. What was the role of former Speaker Bill O'Brien in all of this? There's been sort of this talk of this invisible hand of him intervening in sort of a vengeful fashion against the current Speaker. Sure. What was his role?
So I called him in. I called him in as a friend. Okay, I've maintained a continued friendship with O'Brien since he became Speaker the first time. And I was in over my head when it came to this group was a lot larger than I thought it would be. And he also saw the budget process from a very different standpoint. He didn't see it as a member. He saw it from the position of Speaker. And he could field questions that I couldn't field, even though I was knee deep or arm deep in looking at numbers. It was more than that. It was a discussion. So I called him in as a friend to ask so we could field questions.
As a coach. So I just wanted to rewind just a little bit. The 32 number that they keep saying, that number isn't the actual number. You have to look at the vote on the committee amendment, and it's a third of the caucus. That is the true number. I know, you know, not everyone was clear on
what to do on
HB2, so don't get caught on the 32. Right. It's double that.
The vote against HB1 the prior day was a good indication of we are clearly a third of the caucus, and I think it makes sense to listen to the third of the caucus. And I think good leadership is one where what they do is they get all the different competing fractions within the Republican Party together.
And it's also the younger demographic within the Republican Party.
There are some distinctions here that are clear, and I think we'll see a lot more of this, and certainly it'll be interesting to see where this heads going into June. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your insight. It was good to have you on, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you a lot more in the next few months.
Great. Thank you.